Alright, what's going back, folks? Welcome to another part of the history of nationalism in the sense of the origins of the First World War. Johnny the historian here. A.K.A. you can say the swearing historian. Say whatever you want. But Johnny the historian is fine with me. Comprende? Polishka? Anyway, so we left off last time at pretty much what the decisions of Tsar Alexander I, okay? From 1801, his reign 1801 to 1825. We learned talked about a little bit of December's revolt or rebellion in Russia. And he really crunches that. But he doesn't crush it because he dies on the eve of such an event. And then his predecessor, his son, Nicholas I, takes on that role. That's his first day on the job. What a hell of a day on the job, right? For Nicholas, he's like, well, what? I gotta do what? Damn. His first night, he had to do this. The first day he is reign as office as Tsar of the Russian Empire, that's what he had to accomplish. But anyway, we'll get to that later on. Alright. Now, it's kind of a little bit of recap here. Previously, a little bit more into it, but a little bit more of a recap. Now, the suppression of the French revolutionary ideas, particularly in this sense of nationalism. All right, when the victorious powers, or the concert of Europe in a lot of senses, and the development of alliances and coalitions against Napoleon, it was not just to defeat Napoleon, but also the ideas that he was trying to spread and the ideals of the revolution that they were trying to suppress and to stop in their tracks, like bad weeds going across the European garden. Well, they spread as much pesticides as they could and enough herbicide, but it took root within Europe, all right? From Russia to Portugal, all right? From Norway to Greece. And the thing is, within France itself, they wanted to subdue what was happening in France. All right? Now, they wanted to bring back the Bourbon monarchy. They wanted to install Louis VI or Louis XVIII. Okay? To restore that monarchy, to restore that French Bourbon heritage or lineage into its government. And it does it very well. It attempted to suppress that way because it was a conservative order trying to do this and to bring him back in power. The funny thing is, like I said, the French were almost like addicts. They were starting to they were in recovery, but then all of a sudden they took a relapse. Back to the bottle, boys. We're going back to monarchy. And they succeeded in doing this. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4 republics in France in about 100 and some years. So they constantly go back and forth, okay? Constantly. Because you're going to have Napoleon II. The last one you're going to have is Napoleon III. We'll get there eventually in those times. But it's amazing that this is where the revolution and the ideals of liberalism, equality, unity, all stem from rights and privileges, nationalism. But it keeps going back and forth. All right? It's like, do I want it? No, I don't want it. I want it? No, I don't want it. Let's try it again. No, I don't want it. It's good. We got it. Worse than a kid trying to decide what toy it wants to go with. Do I want the squirt gun or do I want the BB gun? I'll take the BB gun. No, I want the squirt gun. You know? So, that's what France is pretty much doing. That's what it seems like it's doing. Alright? Now, with the formation of the Holy Alliance, as you recall in the last episode, it was one of Alexander's best haste ideas to come up with this alliance. Russia really pushes this alliance between Russia, Austria, and Prussia, the major monarchies of the East and Central Europe. Because the West seems like it's going into chaos. It's got constitutional monarchies. It's got republicanism. It's got the setup of governments that totally go against the old world views of Europe and what it stood for in Europe for well over 1,000 years. The concept of divine right, monarchy, absolute rule. Now, this takes on a different thing. Now, this coalition also, with the revolution itself, it was a kind of a Christian monarchist values that they were trying to install with the Holy Alliance, okay? There's a little bit more to the Holy Alliance, which we'll be talking way down the road again, because we're really going to dig into it. It's one of my interesting alliances because it really doesn't have an effect a whole lot on the international or European stage. But it's enough to have some kind of blemish, right? Short-lived character on stage. Comes in, hello, hey, woohoo, we're going to do this. Gives you one key piece of information of what the future is going to hold for Europe. But besides that, what it actually does, not a whole lot. Very not a whole lot. It tries to suppress liberalism and nationalism and the other ideals of the French Revolution. And it tries to do this more or less inefficiently, okay? But the effects of nationalism, though, on Alexander's decisions. Now, we're eventually going to get to Nicholas, all right, within Russia, okay? This is one thing that I can tell you that I just love. So, every positive or every action has a positive and negative effect, correct? Every action has a reaction. Well, always there's two sides of the field. There's matter, there's antimatter, there's dark, there's light. There's always two sides of the coin, naturally. There's always going to be two sides, minimum. You're never going to get everyone on the same page, ever. You'll have the majority on this page and the other majority on this page, but you'll never get everybody on the same page. Maybe back when the coming of Christ. All right? And Armageddon. You might be able to get everyone on the same page, or the sense of War of the Worlds, where we get invaded by an alien race and we all get on the same page. All right? Great moral. The greatest, obvious moral of that whole entire movie. Well, originally a book, as you remember. Which, just a side note, that was published all over the radio. And people really believed it during the time. So back in the day, but it's a nice little interesting note to look into. It's very fascinating to what people believe. There's people actually say we're getting invaded by aliens going outside. There's a war going on. It's crazy. It's crazy. And it tells you people haven't really changed ever. All right, especially when you're introduced to such technology. You just kind of mess that up in a lot of aspects. Okay. But anyways. But this triggered a counter revolution against what we're talking about, nationalism. Now, to oppose such a powerful wave of revolutionary ideas across Europe, you need a stronger, even more determined counterattack to push it all the way back to Paris and leave it the hell in France. And really, that's what Austria and Russia really wanted to do, was leave it in the French border. Okay, all those ideas, leave it in France. We don't want it to spread. Now, just like we did in COVID times, try to limit the spread, well, that didn't happen now, did it? A lot of ideas just didn't happen to try to stop the spread. That's why ideas are more greater than weapons. Weapons you can seize and that's the end of it. But ideas, you can't see them, right? The easiest penetration is ideas. Well, except for that girl. Anyway, so, back in the day, she was easily penetrated. Whew, if I did it, anybody could do it. So, right, we all have those times in our lives in our teenage years. So, here's the kicker. All right, this is what I love about history. There's so much to it, but we're trying to limit that in the short period of time that we do have. So, to keep the video and things like that. Now, you got to remember, in 1812 in Russia, let's say, okay, there's a massive, strong patriotic fervor, okay, in favor and rallying behind the Tsar as the head, right, of rebelling the French out of Russian territory, okay? And expelling them out. And the thing is, that invasion and that war, just like in Canada, remember, the War of 1812 across the pond, all right, across that Atlantic pond, it was still happening in Canada. We were starting to defy ourselves as Canadians, developing that national identity through a lot of concepts and ideals of nationalism. Same thing was happening in Russia, which is hilarious, because that invasion of the French, it wasn't a while since Russia was invaded. They kind of got lost in the whole serfdom, right? But those ideas still, for the French Revolution, survived in Russia and were introduced. But you still had that patriotism towards the Tsar. This were the Russian people, not their subjects throughout the Russian Empire, like the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, the Finns, the Romanians, all right, the Georgians, all right, the list goes on and on and on. That's the thing with an empire. But for the Russians themselves, as I'm talking about, they get that sense. It's planted, and it ain't going anywhere, all right? It ain't going anywhere. Now, the massive influence of Russian nationalism and the reform movements really took place. During this time is known as the Patriotic War, okay, of 1812. Not the Great Patriotic War, which is in reference to the Russian War and its involvement in the Second World War, okay? A little different. The Great Patriotic War. There's one before. People never question that. But that was actually the War of 1812 and against Napoleon. And that's what pretty much was referenced to, all right? All the way to the March to Paris. It's something, it doesn't happen too much in history, but this is the only time in history where the Russian army and a Tsar marched into Paris. Huge, right? It was huge. You can't say it wasn't. This was triumphant. You know, this really put Russia on number one European stage of one of the superpowers. Right? Does it very well. Now, the Napoleonic Wars, you can remember, helped spread the concepts of liberty, equality, and liberalism, and national identity is what we're really basically focused on. Because that national identity cultivated in pretty much based upon what it shared. Its culture, its language, its religion, all right? Rather than not domestic rule, or monarchical rule, all right? And change that aspect. These ideas came out of it. And it inspired many movements, right? Even in Russia. But Russia wanted to be the head, the sole head and spearhead of the anti-coalition against the ideas of the French Revolution. Because it was a threat to their very existence. Sure, we live in a world where the left is because the people in power wanted to hold and keep their power. Well, dear, no shit. Right? But the concept that they did that and actually inspired the Russian people in a patriotic fervor was something else. Right? Every action has a reaction. But also every domino fall, another domino falls. Right? Now, because of the significance of it all, okay, when a lot of those young officers, as we remember, we talked in the last video, that came back with and viewed the world and were enlightened, right? Not like America. America should know more about what's going on in the rest of the world instead of knowing just about America. It's good to put America first, but you can actually have the ability to know the rest of the world. And the only thing I love about it is one of the greatest quotes is that war teaches the Americans geography, right? So it's kind of like, kind of a little shitty on a lot of parts there. Now, the reactions, especially of Alexander, and especially when it comes to Nicholas I, after the December's revolt in 1825, is the development, and even through Prussia and Austria, is the development of secret police to counteract the secret societies. Because there were secret political societies forming, right? Like in Russia, you had the Decembrists, all right? They demanded the Constitution and the abolition of serfdom within Russia. That's the two major demands that they wanted. Not allowable. Not going to happen. And Nicholas's first day on the job as Tsar Nicholas I crushes that. He had the first day on the job, he had to kill officers, arrest them, and blow cannon fodder right into the square and killing officers and soldiers and protesters, the Decembrists. It was a slaughterhouse. It was a bloodbath. Cannon shot, grape shot into, and he's like, fire upon it. The blood is on my hands. He realized what it was. This is one of the most notorious parts of turning points in Russian history and events that actually took place, and there's a lot to it, and it's beautiful in its own right, and it shows you the inspiration of the Russian people, you know, what they could take, what they could really take. All right, and they took a lot. Okay, they really took a lot. So, they really took a lot. But how did it reshape European politics? All right, and Russia does a very important part of that in the establishment of the Holy Alliance, but that wasn't really a concrete thing. Now, Alexander became the central figure. Now, one of the great things you're going to hear in the 19th century is Congress. Now, the Congress of Vienna. All right, now this takes place 1814 to 1815 to determine how Europe's going to be set up after the defeat of Napoleon, which that did occur. So all the major powers and everyone gets together to decide, okay, who's getting what, what's going to be carved up, how are we going to change this, what are we going to set Europe up for? It's almost, in a sense, the first sense of NATO or European Union. It's pretty much the forerunner, all right? It is one of those bricks that are laid the foundation of such an idea. But it didn't have the quite right environment or the right everything to actually muster it, to grow it. It died. It weeded a little bit, and then it shriveled and died. It wasn't in the right circumstances, all right? Metaphorically speaking, it didn't have the right fertilizer, all right? Or anything to do that. Now, because the Congress of Vienna that took place, they wanted to re-establish the balance of power in Europe. Check and balance, all right, among the political powers, because they didn't want something like this to happen again, and they were very clear that they didn't want something like this to happen again. But the problem is they have a new problem. The ideas of the French Revolution were spreading. Nationalism is the one we're talking about, and it was threatening to the old orders, which is empires and monarchies. It really threatened. It became a cancer to these people. All right. Now, one thing about Russia, and one thing Napoleon did, he created the Duchy of Poland, which was like, what? Okay. Now, after 1795 was pretty much the third and final partition of Poland. Okay, you got to remember, Poland had 3 partitions, carved up between Prussia, Austria, and Russia. That country didn't cease to exist after 1795. But all of a sudden, it had a blip of existence under Napoleon. Oh, and with nationalism, it got raring for the Poles. All right? And for nearly Poles, it caused a war with Poland and a very rocky road that we still see the effects where Russians and Poles don't like each other today, especially the Poles don't like Russians. All right? Because of this history, because of what happened, the repercussions of Napoleon and of nationalism that it sponsored in Poland. When Napoleon established the Duchy of Warsaw, it brought back that Polish fervor. Remember, it was carved up between Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Not that long ago. So, it was short-lived, but then all of a sudden it disappeared again. Because Russia took it over. This time around, they're not going to let anything happen. Now, also the problem is, it led to Russian fears of dominance and aggression, which we kind of see in Europe today, right? In a lot of aspects. And the great thing about it is, history doesn't repeat itself, it just has a different rhyme and rhythm. You know, it may have the same foundation, but different structure. Depends however you want to put it. Alright, it has the same balls, but it got a different E. Okay? You know, it's got the same titties, but just a different size. But they're still titties. Right? You want to take that sexual reference. Right? Which is notorious in everything that's sung today, which is retarded. But anyway. Now, this established Russia as a major power after this. So Russia really established itself as a superpower, especially once it marched its army into Paris. Now, a lot of things happened right after what was happening during even the Napoleonic era. And the thing is, one of the greatest events that actually take place first, well, not really first per se, right? All right, you have a Serbian revolt in 1813 within the Ottoman Empire. Now, we haven't mentioned the Ottoman Empire. The Balkans is one of my favorite spots, and to study history is part of Eastern European history. And what takes place now? One thing, everything's starting to set up. You have this side, you have this side, then you have Russia, right? But the next major thing that where nationalism really takes hold and really shows its ugly face, beneficial, positive and negative, okay, is the Greek War of Independence. All right? That takes place about 1821 to 1832. And give or take, all right, it's the Greek War of Independence. It's a long process war with the Greeks against the Ottoman Empire. At this point in time, the Ottoman Empire is pretty much referred as the sick man of Europe. You probably heard that phrase in history class, right? When it was mentioned the Ottoman Empire during this time. Now, the Ottoman Empire, you know, one thing about the Greek War of Independence is the nationalist role, the role of nationalism within that. Well, it's also the War of Independence. All right? This goes back to the Greeks, right? Remember we talked about the Greeks a couple episodes ago, and with ancient nationalism kind of concepts with the Greeks, right? We talked about Herodotus, as I mentioned in his works, the histories and everything like that. Go back to that. Now, one thing about the role of nationalism, and one thing I really enjoy is one of the slogans among the patriots and the the rebels and the nationalists is basically kind of going off the saying, remember the American slogan, give me liberty or give me death. Well, one thing I love about them, it's freedom or death. They just get right to the point, freedom or death. Was a really powerful slogan for the Greeks. And freedom or death. It wasn't like, give me liberty or give me death. That's like a whole sentence. The Greeks are like, hey, we're going to shorten that up. Freedom or death. Alright? And get right to the point. And this was the motto for each one of Greeks during the War of Independence. Now, the Greeks themselves, you remember back in the day, back in Athens, back the city-states, and back in the Greco-Persian War. Remember that, right? Well, the Greeks saw themselves as inferior to the Turks. Alright, it's like Herodotus. The Greeks, the barbarians. The Turks are the barbarians. And they really were more inferior. They believed that they were more inferior in so many levels over the Turks. And that is one part of an ugly thing of nationalism, but not quite, okay? So, basically, by this time, this is when the Greeks start to grab that, right? Now, nationalism already spread by this point, and it arrived to the Greeks, and the Greeks just fell in love with it. The Greeks were like, yeah, we had this before. But for the last couple thousand years, we've been occupied by so many empires. And for the Ottomans and this, we didn't. No. We're bringing it back, but this time we have the right conditions to seal it. We have the right ingredients, and we have to thank Napoleon and the French Revolution. And exactly, this is what happens. The Ottoman Empire was pretty much getting to it's on the decline and fall at this point in time. It's on its last leg, and pretty much nationalism is going to be that leprosy is going to take out its last leg, and it's going to collapse to the floor face first. The Ottomans does not look really good at this point in time, and the Greeks really set the stage for that, and it really shows the rest of the world the state of the Ottoman Empire as much as the problem that what nationalism does to empires and what it can do for you, for a lot of people. Like, we can get over the empires. We can have our national identity, unite under one sole nation. And the thing is that among the Greeks of all classes, regardless of where they were in society, Hellenism really took, Pan-Hellenism, okay? That sense of Greek identity really took shape, all right? It was especially fostered mostly by the Greek Orthodox Church, surprisingly enough, right? Pretty cool, pretty cool. Now, despite that, besides the Greek, that's the religious aspect, they all shared, like in before, during the Greco-Persian War, the same language, the same religion, the same customs, the same traditions. But this time there's no city-states. It's all Greeks. That's gone. Thanks to being conquered by empires, it really solidified the Greek nation within the empire. Alright, so even by that aspect, their administration arrangements with the Ottoman Empire throughout the course of their history gave them that Greek identity, and it really developed it. So the Greeks really said, that's enough. They've seen what happened to Napoleon, they've seen all these ideologies that come out of the French Revolution. Don't worry, the entire European continent was on its toes of what the result of that was. Alright, everything from liberalism to nationalism. Alright? So, due to economic developments, okay, within and outside of the Ottoman Empire, you got to remember in the 18th century, Greece is still within the empire. Now, because of this, things start to take place. This is where economics really comes towards a nationalism aspect. Because why is there a lot of Greeks introduced to nationalism? They were introduced during the Revolution, and right after the Revolution, and during the Napoleonic Age, and right up to 1821. Okay? So, a lot of Greek merchants and sailors made a lot of money and generated huge amounts of wealth. Alright? And converts. So guess what? They would send their sons to find, and they would find schools and libraries within Greece with that money. Oh yes. But the problem is they're going to need people. That's where a lot of nationalist ideas were preached and taught. But we're going to send a lot of our sons and daughters, but mostly sons, to Western universities and schools, particularly in France. Okay? And in Western Europe, a lot of young Greeks from wealthy families, a lot of these merchants, went there, learned the ideals, and brought it back home and laid the foundations for societies and started the rebellion, right? So, you could also argue that today that a lot of people come to Canada, but the problem is a lot of them stay. They don't bring these ideologies or what they learn here of democracy and freedom and the rights that we have and transfer them back to their countries. It just doesn't really happen anymore. That age is like put out, alright? Sucks. Stupid what they do now. Alright? But one thing that really sponsored the Greeks was actually in 1813 was the first Serbian revolt. One thing about the Serbians, and this really encouraged the Greeks to rebel against the Ottomans, because the Serbs were rebelling against the Ottoman Empire, and they wanted their freedom. Now later on, we're going to discuss the discussions that actually start to happen in Oseta or Odessa within Russia, okay, between the Greeks and the Russians, and the discussions that started to happen within the Russian Empire on the fate and the sponsoring of Greek independence. It's pretty cool. All right, it's always good to look into. Never hurts. Just do it. Okay. So in March, 1821. So there's a lot of Muslims within Greece. Now here's one of the ugly heads of nationalism. Okay, gotta blow my nose. Now, during the Greek War of Independence, a lot of atrocities would take place in the sense of nationalism and superiority, especially that. Now, in March 1821, this is how she all started off. There was a lot of Muslims living throughout Greece, and especially during the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So, what takes place in the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Greece? A lot of massacres of Muslims and Christians alike. So the Muslims are killing the Christians are killing the Muslims. This is how it's going. Okay? Just a slaughterhouse. You know, about 20 to 50,000 were killed on average in those couple weeks that this massive thing was happening. Alright? Each side massacred each other, not just throughout Greece. It was a slaughterhouse. Alright, this is the religious fervor, right? This is that inferior complex that the Greeks started to have. This is the ugly side of nationalism. And it really plays out greatly. Ferociously, it really played out terribly within the Civil War itself. So, this was a huge atrocity that were happening on both sides, and particularly for the Greeks, are really going out and killing tens of thousands of Muslims and Ottoman subjects, right? It almost seemed, you could say, it was like almost ethnic cleansing in a lot of aspects. People would argue that, but it really wasn't. It was war. They were doing it to each other, so it wasn't just like one-sided field. And that's the reality and the facts, the historical facts of that. Now, in October the 20th, okay, 1827, you have up to this event the Battle of Nerino. This is one of the most notorious Navy battles of world history and a turning point in most of the most important battles. Okay, it was pretty much between France, Great Britain, and Russia was pretty much against the Ottoman Empire. But it really became a lot for the geographical and strategic purposes of this naval victory. And especially for Russia, it really took the day for its navy, because this battle really sets the stage that there's going to be people sponsoring Greece and the rise of nationalism for Greece against the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so within the Ottoman Empire, which we'll get to later on, eventually down the road, on where this battle takes place, because it comes from Egypt. Egypt becomes an autonomous. There's a lot here too, but we'll get there later down the road. So just remember this important battle, which is October the 20th, 1827. Most notorious, one of the most notorious naval battles, like the Battle of, Gibraltar, or the Battle of Jutland, or the Battle of Trafalgar, or the battle, right? All these important naval battles, or the Battle of Actium. All right, so off Greeks, back in Roman times, but very important, very important. Now, one of the Greek generals at the time, and predominantly the main leader of the movement and the military and political operations of the Greek War of Independence against the Ottoman Empire, he put a major defeat against the Ottomans in 1822. Now, during this battle, it was very nationalistic, and freedom or death was really prompted on the battlefield, and the soldiers were unified, solely unified. And Constantinos was on freedom and destiny, and one of his quotes was like, "God has signed our liberty. We can't go back on that, his promise." And that shows, and that was said, and this drove the Greeks to win the battle and the slaughterhouse. But you see within that quote itself that Orthodox religion, right? That Greek orthodoxy to God, not to Allah, to God. Now, another famous quote came out of this time. Our race was crucified many times. Now, because of the bloodbaths that really happened with the Muslims and the Christians in the course of the entire Ottoman occupation of the Greek people. Okay? And we are still alive. Right? It's a very powerful quote. And people were like, yeah, we suffered a lot and we're still here. The Greek identity is still here, despite that the Ottomans tried to every time stamp us out. We still are here, more unified than ever. That was the main ingredient. Was the Ottoman Empire to really usher in pan-Hellenism within the Greek people and nationalism to rise to create their own independent nation. And that was the yeast that would set that bread, right? And it proves to be very, very, very good. Very, very good. All right? There's a lot of verb in that. Now, to wrap up the Greek War of Independence, of the nationalistic pride within it, it also comes from the Treaty of Constantinople, which was actually signed in 1832. Now, this recognizes Greece as an independent nation, separate from the Ottoman Empire. Huge victory. It became known as the Kingdom of Greece. Kingdom of Greece, yes, it wanted a monarchy. All right? Now, the superpowers of Europe didn't sponsor nationalism, but they had now, okay? Because nationalism is a cancer for an empire. Now, it's ironic that they're like, we'll support this nationalist movement against the Ottoman Empire. And then we'll conquer the Greeks, or control the Greeks as their independent nation. Ballsy. Very ballsy move. Very interesting and overconfidence over that aspect. Russia was saying this, Britain was saying this, France, to somewhat degree. Even Austria was looking at the possibility, and the Ottomans wanted to get the Greeks back under their umbrella. It really sets the political stage. And with nationalism, one thing about the Greek War, it actually contributes to the origins, in a lot of senses, to World War I. Because of this, we'll learn later on, because of what happens here, there's a lot of heartache between the Greeks and the Ottomans at this point. You know, huge victory for the Greeks, humiliating defeat and loss for the Ottomans that they want to gain this back. They're realizing they're becoming weak. Right? They can't even hold the Greeks down anymore. That's in their eyes. You think it was worse when the Serbians rebelled in 1813. Nationalism is a really strong force against the Ottoman Empire. And it actually states its case to the rest of Europe, is really focusing on that. This is what nationalism can do. And one thing, the downside of this is, it sets the stage for an example for the rest of ethnic groups and peoples that are within empires, that Greece can gain its independence, so can we. It really hits the stage hard. And it really hits hard. Okay? Now, during the War of Greek Independence, and right at the end of it, all right, the revolutions of 1930. All right, some people like the 1930s. There's a few revolutions, but when we come back in the next episode, we're going to talk about the revolutions of 1930 and how nationalism really affected this, because nationalism was really picking up its pace. Right, the War of Independence. You had the Serbian Revolt, which we'll get back to in time. We'll have to go back a little back trace, but really, the Greek War of Independence really sets the stage, and it really sets up how the empires are what they're going to face with nationalism against, to hold on to their strong holdings of imperial power. It's really going to test it. When you have a united front, which you've seen in Greece, is the fact they share the same religion, the Orthodox Greek Church, right? Orthodoxy. Same language, same religion, same culture, same customs, same traditions, and guess what? The same geographical location. All the Greeks. So this was very, very substantial in the foundations of development of nationalism as it origins towards the First World War, because you really start to see it, and it becomes the first stage. It's a cancer. It's a leprosy. All right? It's a disease. It's a viral STD. Okay? It is gonorrhea for an empire. All right? And every time it flares up, it loses a piece of itself. The Ottomans got a little bit of that gonorrhea. The Greeks flared up. They lost a little piece of themselves. In a bloody mess. But, so, it's getting to that point. And one thing about when it comes, I love, because it's Greeks is a part of Eastern European history. And when you really, I recommend, if you want to look deeper into it, eventually I'm going to do episodes on actually the War of Greek Independence. We're going to go really in depth in it. Every aspect. All right? But from grassroots to political and everything in between. All right? Roots, trunk, foliage. All right? Or the treetop. All right? So, that's how, or the canopy. Right? So, it's totally amazing what starts to take place. And you got to remember, nationalism and environment. It really adapts to the Greeks very well, and the Greeks don't take it and adapt it to themselves. It seems like nationalism adapts to the Greek world. And remember back when we talked about a few episodes ago about Pan-Hellenism, and back during that time of Herodotus, that, right, that's sharing my identity, finding a common enemy, but they only had some of the bricks and some of the pieces, but the mortar was missing. So it all fell apart, the idea of nationalism. It had a lot of the verber, it had a lot of the bricks and the foundation, but it wasn't a finished product, right? Didn't take into the Ottomans until Napoleon to have that concrete and that mortar to hold it together. And that's when modern nationalism is born that we still face today and that we still have in society today. There's a lot of positive and negative effects. The negative effects is that superiority where the Greeks just started killing the Muslims, but recall the Muslims were actually killing the Christians, the Orthodox Christians in Greece at the time. Tens of thousands. It was just a slaughterhouse over weeks during that year when it first broke out. Because the Ottomans were trying to crush that Greek spirit, right? That shared nationalistic identity, right? But until next time, we are going to be talking about pretty much the revolutions of 1830. And it comes up to one of my favorite revolutions, which is like, what happened? That really happened? All right, it's one of my faves. And before we get up to the revolutions of 1848, okay? The revolutions of 1830 are very important in the sense of how nationalism starts to amplify and gets, like, just goes out of control. And the time it gets to 1914, it's just like on steroids, buffed, little injected like 2 needles of steroids, did a line of coke, and smoked a bowl of meth. It is just out of whack, right? This is how it really goes. Oh, wait, that's when the Nazis take it over. So either or. Until next time, this is Johnny the Historian. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you had a comment, please like, subscribe, whatever. I'm not going to do all that. This is your choice, all right? Not my problem if you do or not. All right? But it actually proves a lot of my theories. So, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Not really, but you don't know what I'm talking about. So, anyway, you might be actually doing nothing, and it actually proves my point. But, either or. But the next time I have an episode, we are going to be looking into God's Word. All right? We're going to be doing a Christian historical theology and historical analysis and everything you can possibly imagine on the Bible. All right? God's Word. Okay? We're definitely going to have to keep that one PG. And I'll explain everything when I do that episode on do not follow me as a Christian. Okay? But I like to take account for what Christians actually do because I am the way I am is because of these people and how I was treated by a lot of churches and Christians. And I'm like, they don't follow Christ. in Jesus' teachings pisses me off. But you call yourself a Christian, right? Devoted for 40 years, they would say. But anyway, we'll get into that next time. That's going to start that. I'm going to be starting that series pretty soon, hopefully within the next little bit. But next time I'm going to come back to this series on the origins of the First World War, nationalism, the catalyst of nationalism, and the origins of the First World War. We are going to talk about the next set of revolutions that take place in Europe. It's a foreshadowing, all right? Keep that in mind, all right? A lot of things are material, other ones will relate, and hopefully you're able to relate and see that. Don't have to mention it within the next episode, the next couple episodes, okay? All right. Until then, go out there, and if a historian or a libtard gets history wrong, slap him up to the head and be a man about it. Take care until next time.